Okay, welcome back. As usual, Peter.
Yeah, good to be back.
Episode number 37. So this time we're doing the Enchiridion, which we've done in the past. So we actually did this in episode 16, and we are essentially gonna revisit it. I actually didn't ask you before. Did you re-listen to the podcast?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Did you?
I I also haven't,
Yeah,
and I on purpose didn't because I want to do this
compare.
as close to a blank slate as possible.
Uh,
The only thing is,
uh,
I glanced at the notes, not really reading the notes that we made, but just to see, and I think that we did sort of 10 or so chapters instead of
mm,
going through every single page because it's a very short book.
yeah.
And so we're going to do a similar format, but other than that, I don't know. So
Mm,
I'm going to probably at some stage this month re-listen to that episode
mm,
and see how similar.
yeah, I think for me, I know probably we should have said this, but I will anyways. Um, from the last time, I remember we pressed for time. That's why we slotted it in. And I remember when we had agreed to pick in 10, I think I just randomly picked 10 sections or 10 chapters to sort of go
And just
through.
read.
I just read those. So I remember like yesterday, or was it the day before, when I was actually reading it, I was like, okay, there's things that seem familiar, but there's
Yeah.
sections that are complete blank. And then I was trying to figure out
Okay.
why. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I did read all of them last time and this time again, and I
Mm.
remembered a bunch of them, but not. I think I remembered most of them,
Mm.
but I don't actually know how much my thoughts have changed on them.
Since then,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I guess we can run through it and then we can see. Yeah. Should we go for the book summary?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So, the Enchiridion, often translated as the Handbook, is a collection of teachings by Epictetus, recorded and compiled by Arrian, one of Epictetus's students. Epictetus was born a slave, his Greek name roughly meaning acquired one. After gaining his freedom, he became a well-known Stoic philosopher and teacher. One of the main themes of the Handbook is the distinction between what's up to us and what's not, often called the dichotomy of control. Epictetus teaches us that understanding this difference, acting accordingly, and not being ruled by things outside of our control are essential to a good life. And that is the summary. Do you have any additional things you want to add there, Peter?
No, not at all. Yeah, we can dive in.
All right. Okay, so just before we dive in, I have like a vague suspicion that I did this last time as well, but maybe not. Is just sort of getting a rough idea of what they talk about when they mention the word nature here, because every now and again it comes up, and when they talk about nature, they're not talking about, or Epictetus isn't talking about like trees and animals and things like that. He's talking about almost the rational order of things, or the way that sort of life and fate and that plays out, and also often he's referring to reason and virtue. So another way to think about it is human nature. So our human nature, people would, or the Stoics would say, we are rational, so we think through things. We're social and we moral beings. And so when they talk about nature, you can almost think about like, I guess maybe what is a good human nature, that's sort of what they meaning. I'm sure that a Stoic philosopher of modern times would critique my understanding of it. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt. But that's at least it's not talking about trees and animals. I know that much.
Yeah.
All right. So let's dig into chapter 1. I'm going to read when I go through. I'm going to read snippets, but they're kind of large snippets, almost the entire piece. It's just skipping over small things. All right. So, chapter 1. Some things are within our control, while others are not. Under our control are opinions, desires, aversions, and generally our own actions. Not under our control are our bodies, property, reputation, social status, and generally things that are not our actions. Remember, if you regard what belongs to others as your own, you will face obstacles. However, if you see only what is truly yours as your own, and recognize what belongs to others as theirs, no one will be able to force or stop you. You will not blame anyone, you will not accuse anyone, and you will not act against your will. If you aim for such significant achievements, remember that they require considerable effort. If you also desire power and wealth while seeking these achievements, you may fail to attain either because you are pursuing both. Practice saying to every troubling appearance, "You are just an appearance, not the reality." Then analyze it, using your principles, primarily whether it pertains to what is within your control or not. If it concerns something beyond your control, be ready to declare that it does not affect you. So yeah, that's I think a good almost introduction and summary of the dichotomy of control. There are things that are within your control and there are things that are not within your control. And the main thing is to try and distinguish between those things that are within your control and that aren't in your control, and to essentially accept the reality that the things that aren't within your control aren't within your control. And so things like, I guess one of them that he puts here, social status or reputation or property, those kind of things, often we kind of blur the line and we think, oh no, those things are in our control. And of course, to some degree that they are. We can influence if we have a good or bad social reputation. But it's not completely within our control, and that's kind of what he's getting at. So if, for example, someone dislikes you, but you are, to the best of your ability, you are being a good, moral, kind person, and that person doesn't like you, then it's outside of your control, and it's not something that you should worry about or spend time agonizing over, but rather you should realize, based on the dichotomy of control, that that is something that is outside of your control. And so trying to force it to be something that you can't is not worthwhile. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting. I mean, when I was looking back or reading it, as you were reading through it, I can't remember exactly which book and the exact thing, but it also speaks about how pretty much it narrows it down that the very few things that we really are truly in control of in our whole entire life. And I think it was one's health and something. I mean, it still deteriorates over time, but it was, I think, health and so. But it was like two things that you sort of are responsible, have a say in, but other than that, everything else you kind of happens because it happens. You really cannot change your order how it happens. But yeah, going back, like lately, I mean, just probably also on like a personal level, like I'm starting to realize things like, for instance, how people treat you, just so that's
Mm.
just in addition to like reputation. It's like you cannot, yes, you might have, like you said, an influence on what your reputation or your social status is, but I'm mainly focusing on reputation, but that's usually how people perceive you at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
that may differ from person to person. And the other factors might be the mood you're in at a certain time, that they got a certain part of you and just fixated with that and made a generalization of who you are, And again, just to add to that, like I was saying as of late, it's also to do with how people treat you. So often when people treat us a certain way, we look inwardly and try to figure out like what did I do to deserve that, etc., etc. But more so, it's you have to also realize it's just that who that person is. They,
Yeah.
they maybe they are bringing the experiences just makes them treat people a certain way. But yes, you might feel a certain way about it, but if you know who you really are, then you shouldn't let that really affect you.
Yeah.
There might be something to take from it, but yeah, it's one of those, I guess. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to try and distinguish between the things that are true or are not true. Because if someone has an opinion about you and you feel hurt by it, it it might be a sign of that you misunderstanding something about the situation, because either they are right, in which case you should feel bad, and you should learn and grow from that, and that's fine. It's not they're not wrong to have that opinion, or they are wrong, in which case they're wrong about the situation, and that's okay too. People get things wrong, and maybe it's unfortunate. Maybe there's steps that one can take to correct their understanding, but it's not something that we should carry a deep burden with us. If we understand, okay, this is actually true or it's not, or it's an opinion that is within my control, which is pretty much my own opinion, or if it's something that's not within my control, which is someone else's. But yeah, the health thing as well, though. I don't think that the Stoics would say that your health is in your control. Again, you have an influence on it, but I think that they would be like, it's just something that's not in your control. The list that they give is, like you said, the things within our control are quite narrow, and they put here, or Epictetus puts, opinions, desires, aversions, and generally your own actions. So it's the things that you do in the world and the things in your mind, and that's pretty much the scope of it. Anything outside of that, money, fame, power, none of those things are in your control.
Yeah.
One last comment before we move on to the next piece that I found interesting was the part where he says that this aiming towards this is a significant thing. Like it takes considerable effort, as he says. And if you are trying to pursue having almost like a right orientation with nature, and at the same time you're trying to pursue power and wealth, then you're probably going to achieve none of them, because it's not an easy thing. It's a considerable effort. And I just find that interesting because often, I know for myself, I don't really think that much of it. I'm like, okay, I want to try and be a reasonable person and that. But it's not the thing that's consuming a bunch of my time and effort. But yeah, maybe that's misguided. All right, should we go to the next one, chapter 5?
Yeah.
So it says here, people are not disturbed by events themselves, but by their opinions about those events. For example, death is not inherently terrible. It is the belief that death is terrible that makes it seem so. Therefore, when we feel impeded, disturbed, or grieved, we should not blame others, but ourselves and our own opinions. And an uneducated person blames others for their problems. Someone who has started to learn blames themselves, and someone who is fully educated blames neither others nor themselves. Yeah, I'll let you go. Maybe we'll go you first, and then me first, and then you first. So you go first this time.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I said previously, to be like, well, let's say, for instance, what people say about you or how people treat you, I'll label that as an event, and just like you said before, it's you looking at that event either as true and as false. That's then kind of determines how you feel about the event. Yeah, so it's quite interesting because, I mean, I don't know if we'll look at it, but then it also ties down to the whole thing of how he speaks about losing loved ones. It's like the bound to die anyways. You have to move on. You have to look at death as something that's not paralyzing, rather understand that it's something that will happen and you move on from it. But in our human nature, it's hard. And I mean, I think even in that chapter it continues to say that it's easier for you to tell someone that, to be like, it's happened, when you're consoling them, like, let's move on, up until you find yourself in that situation and then grief takes over and you're paralyzed by it,
Yeah.
So it's yes, I think it's one of those things that are easier said than done, that you blame neither for an event. It's pretty much that last statement. It's the kind of saying your opinions about things don't have to attach to individuals. Just on a high level, you kind of just have to accept that things will happen as they are.
Yeah, it's I think this is one of the core ideas of Stoicism that has stuck in my mind, where just that idea of separating out what is actually happening from what is the opinion that one is having, specifically oneself, is having about a situation. And often we can find a situation a lot more daunting in our own minds than it actually is. I mean, to use I would imagine, fairly common example is taxes. Like, people get very riled up about taxes and having to do taxes and things like that. But if you take a step back and sort of almost observe it as a third party, like, sometimes there's complications and things like that, but that opinion that you have about the complexity and scariness is just that, it's an opinion. And often what you'll find is when you actually go through the process and come out the other side, you're like, okay, it wasn't that bad. Assuming that you had things in reasonable order beforehand. But yeah, and then I also found it, the last part, quite nice to reflect on, where I don't know if the uneducated maybe conveys it well, because uneducated versus educated, what I assume that they're talking about is educated in philosophy, specifically probably the philosophy of Stoicism. But I'll read it again. An uneducated person blames others for their problems. Someone who has started to learn blames themselves, and someone who is fully educated blames neither others nor themselves. So when events happen and we have opinions about those events, often we find ourselves quick to blame others for those things. And then as you sort of learn more, then you're like, oh, okay, actually, I'm often to blame in these scenarios. I could have done something different. And then you learn more, and then you realize, like, oh, okay, like that's just how the situation played out. Like, yeah, I mean, there's lots of nuances there, but I thought it's an interesting thing to think about. All right, should we go to 13? So it says, if you want to improve, be willing to be seen as senseless and foolish regarding external matters. Be prepared to be thought of as knowing nothing. If you start to seem important to others, be wary of yourself. Understand that it is difficult to maintain both a will that is in harmony with nature and to secure external things. If a person focuses on the one, they will inevitably neglect the other. Okay, this round I'll go first. So I think it's another interesting one, especially the end part there. If a person focuses on one, they will inevitably neglect the other. And when we start to think about the way that we approach things, like the way that we approach, let's say you have a meeting and you need to discuss some technical detail, sometimes we'll be like, oh, okay, I know a little bit about this, and I'm guilty of this as well. And we'll try and make it as though we know more than we do. And if we are pursuing that, instead of just actually being good at the things that we should be aiming to be good at, and acknowledging that we don't know that much about something we don't know about, then what we'll find is we learn more. Because if we like, oh, I actually am not sure about this topic, then people will tell you, oh, okay, I actually know a bit about it, and they'll explain it to you, and then you actually learn more. But if you're pursuing the appearance of knowledge instead of knowledge itself, then you will end up with neither, most likely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with most of this as well, like something that I was sort of like referencing, and I mean, it's come up even in the first chapter of, of your internal and pretty much external things. Just put that in brackets. I'm saying that very, very roughly. With that, what I sense is that things that benefit you as a person, really, as much as, like you said, influences the external, but you have no control over that. The moment you sort of try and then control that narrative of people's perception of you, then you sort of lose it. And I look at it as the Bible says it, of how you cannot serve two masters. Either you live a godly life, or consumed by the things of this earth. So anyways, that's just one thing that I've sort of used to sort of understand that. So in that, like, that reference is like, the living in harmony is like living a godly life, but then if you try to secure the external things, it's like you're trying to have your foot dipped into the things of this world. And at the end of it, it's like one has to has to survive. It's either or. Those things do not coexist in a way.
Yeah, interesting. All right, should we go to the next one? Chapter 20.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says, remember that it is not the person who insults or strikes you that offends you, but rather your opinion that these actions are insulting. When someone irritates you, understand that it is your own perception causing the irritation. Therefore, make a special effort not to be swept away by appearances. If you can buy yourself some time and delay your reaction, you will find it easier to control your emotions. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this when we were speaking about it in the beginning. And I feel like it's something that has been underlying and happening throughout the sections, or something that has stood out for me. But yeah, it's a matter of, again, like you said, you said about, it's either something's true or something's not, and reacting to it doesn't change the fact. You can argue as you may, but it won't change the fact. Like, even personally, I've had the experience where, someone has a perceived notion of you, and instinctively we want to defend ourselves. We'll blow a thing out of proportion trying to defend ourselves. But at the end of the day, that's who they think you are. And again, like you said, it's either there's some truth in it that you can learn from it and grow from it, or there's no truth in it and you just try to stay on course on what you think is true to you. Even later on, I don't think it's part of the sections that we touch in, I think 33. It even goes as further as saying, like, once they're done, even tell them that, you're actually lying because there's all these other thoughts that I have, But yeah, it is an interesting one that people will say things not trying to elicit a reaction, but depending on how we feel about what's said to us is what sort of determines how big of a reaction we'll have, Yeah.
Yeah, if someone insults you, like they have said something, but it is up to you whether you decide to find it insulting or not. And I think most people almost don't realize that that's an option, that you can be like, oh, I'm going to just choose to not find this insulting. And then what is happening? Because you just don't expect that you can do that. And it comes up as a common theme every now and again in this book, the idea of buying yourself some time to delay your reaction. And I think it's a very helpful strategy when you encounter things like this, where it's someone insults you, or you find something frustrating, or that, to basically just pause and come back to it and reevaluate your thoughts a bit later, because our instinctual reactions aren't always the correct ones. The reactions that we feel like we should have aren't always the best. And I can't remember, but I think doing that kind of thing helps shape the way that you instinctually react as well. The more you try to pause yourself and reflect on it, the more that becomes the natural reaction. instead of just the anger or frustration or being upset about something. So yeah. All right, going on to 25. So it says here, has someone else been preferred over you at a banquet, or been greeted first, or invited to a constellation? If these things are good, you should be happy for them, for the person who has received them. If they are bad, don't be upset that you didn't get them. Remember, if you don't do what others do to get things, you can't expect to be seen as equally deserving. How can you expect the same rewards if you don't visit or flatter them like others do? It would be unfair and greedy to want these rewards without paying the price. Think of it like buying lettuce. If it costs an obolus, which is basically a small Greek coin, like a penny, so I'm going to replace the word with penny. If it costs a penny, and someone pays it to get the lettuce, while you keep your penny and don't get the lettuce, you shouldn't feel deprived. You kept your penny just as the other person got their lettuce. Similarly, if you aren't invited to a dinner, it's because you didn't pay the price of flattery or attention. If you want these things, pay the price. But if you want to avoid paying and still receive the benefits, you are being unreasonable. What do you have instead of a dinner? You have your integrity, as you chose not to flatter or endure insincere behavior. Yeah, so to me it starts off like a bit hard to understand, and then he gives the lettuce example, and it's kind of like, oh, okay, that's what he's getting at. Where basically, do you want to pay the price of flattery in order to get things like being invited to the banquet? They like to talk about banquets here. And I mean, I think, in my opinion, it's completely fine to pay someone a genuine compliment. In fact, I think it can be a good thing because it can boost that person's morale in a healthy way. I think somewhere in here they talk about not doing that, and I think I would disagree. I think that there's a place for doing that in a healthy way. I think that there's also a lot of places, probably a lot more, to do it in an unhealthy, manipulative way, which I don't think is good. And then that's where I would agree with this, where I'm like, yeah, don't pay the price of flattery. That's not true flattery. And maybe even flattery is something you shouldn't ever do, because I think that's almost more the negative version of it. But yeah, paying someone a compliment in a healthy way, I don't think is a terrible thing. But yeah, if it's a helpful way of putting it, where he says, if you don't pay that price, you're being unreasonable to expect the return. If someone doesn't like you, and the thing that they wanted is flattery that they didn't deserve or something, then it's unreasonable to expect that they would treat you differently. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, my thoughts is the first part. It's I know I'll probably use loose terms, but yeah, it's more of starting off with like, celebrate others. Do not celebrate others. If other people are called forth before you are, celebrate them, not now think that, oh, that should be me, etc., etc. And then with the second part, the latest example, to me it's the same as I always say, like, for friendship you sort of have to put in the work on either side, and to me that's what it feels. It's like, yeah, in this case, to kind of say you pay for the letters to get it. If you don't pay, you don't get. It's the same as you put work in things like friendship, relationships, and with the, it's not expectation, but with the hope that the other person sort of awards you the same respect and kind of puts into your relationship or friendship, and it's to that point where if someone doesn't put in the work, then they're not cultivating that friendship or relationship. As a result, then it won't grow. So don't then turn around and be like, oh, but you weren't friends, you just weren't putting in the effort, yeah, that's just how I framed that section.
Yeah. No, I think that's a helpful way of putting it. And the first part, I'm glad you touched on it because I kind of glanced over it. But it's, helpful thing. All right. Going to the next one, 28. If someone handed control of your body to anyone you encountered, you would be upset. Yet you allow your mind to be controlled by anyone you meet. So if they insult you, your peace is disturbed. Aren't you ashamed of this? Yeah. I think it's your turn to go first, Peter.
Yeah, it is. I was just saying, you really
I was trying to count
No, but there's also you replaced intended.
Yeah.
It's fine. I was like having a spasm there, but that's quite interesting, in the sense that, and to me, for this, it's more of we're a generation. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that consumes so much, and we sort of use that. You see what people post, and you now start doubting yourself, your lives, and you want to live a certain way. But like you say, if someone intends to put your body under control of anyone you encounter, you're upset, because it's like it's there, but yet
you're like, this is my body.
This is my
I
body,
control my body.
but yet we let our minds wander that way by what we consume, and that's quite interesting. Like, we need to sort of form those safeguards from what we consume and not let that be control, because that's just as bad as someone saying, I'm putting your body under control.
Yeah, it's. I think you are spot on about the current situation. I'm sure it's been like that to some degree throughout history. I think it's just like extra, I don't know, to put it bluntly, in our faces. Amplified at the moment, because we use our phones and we're scrolling and we're getting all of these adverts and all of these different things. I mean, there's now even to the point where there are massive, from what I can tell, companies like Ground News, which their whole premise is you're getting fed left-wing and right-wing stuff, and we want to make sure that you get them evenly, and that when you're being fed this and that propaganda almost. And I think the advertising world as well is another example of that, where kind of like you're saying, we just get fed so much of this information, and it shapes the way that we make decisions. I mean, I'm sure that we've discussed this part before as well, where you end up, if you're scrolling the whole time, you'll end up wanting to buy a lot more stuff than you would have, or go on a lot more like holidays to fancy places than you would have if you had just been doing other things. I don't know, tending to your garden or building a wooden bench or something like that. And so, we, like Epictetus says, aren't we ashamed of that? Like, aren't we ashamed that we let our minds be so distorted by others, not others only, other people, but just sort of industrial machines of marketing and that. And yet, all at the same time, I think that marketing and a bunch of those things have their places and can be wonderful things. Like if you get a product that is targeted specifically to you and it is actually a helpful thing, that's lovely. Like that's great. But most of the time it's not that. It's just buy this random thing that you don't actually need, and or think this random thought that you don't need to be thinking. Right, going on to the next one. 34. So it says here, when you feel the allure of any pleasure, resist being swept away by it. Let the impulse wait and give yourself a moment to pause. Consider both the moment of enjoying the pleasure and the time after, when you might regret and criticize yourself. Compare these with the satisfaction and self-praise you'll feel if you resist the temptation. Focus on how much better it feels to know that you've exercised self-control and won over temptation. Yeah, for me, sweets is the thing that I always hope that I have more self-control over, but alas. But I also think it's one of those things where in theory, this is a good idea, and probably in practice as well. But in real practice, the better thing is to put the temptation far, far away, so you don't have the sweets in the house, for example, because that's going to be way better. And that's kind of, I think, James Clear and those kind of guys, the way that they would approach the situation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I read this or looked at this as delayed gratification. It's, it's like, what can I put away, now, or what can I stay away from now so that it's much better at a later point? It's the same as, you save now, live within your means now and have that money grow for you to enjoy it later on, So it's as much as you enjoy and you being able to exercise self-control, but it's like at a later point, it does bear fruit, like you're saying. It's like you said in your sweet example, it's like, let me not have them, but there's a bigger picture to that. Like if you continuously eating sweet, it affects your health, but in you resisting that, making provision for your body, making sure that you're much healthier down the line. That's the reward at the end of it,
Yeah. But always easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah, we won't miss that. Easier said than done.
Yeah. Okay, then going to 37. If you have taken on a role beyond your abilities, you've not only acted inappropriately, but you've also neglected what you could have successfully accomplished. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was actually, when I read that, I don't know, probably one of the things that I missed last time I did, or maybe understood it differently last time, but it was a big slap. It's I think so often, again, it's like people looking for, that external validation, and wanting the bigger role, but not fully understanding who they are themselves and knowing what they're capable of doing, and rather doing that well than failing at what you think you could, achieve. It's the whole thing of bidding too much than you can chew, So yeah, it's interesting, everyone wants the big role, but it's like, are you ready for that big role? I mean, I even remember, like, when I had started working, I remember visiting George, and he was kind of throwing the numbers of like what people earn and whatnot, and deep down you're like, oh, I also want to earn that and whatnot, but then you also realize it's like, am I even ready to sort of handle such money, and because everyone wants a lot, but they forget that there is also. I'm not saying that I do not want to be paid a lot or whatnot. I would like to, but I think from that, like, to me, that has never been my motivation. Like, as much as I'd want, it's never my driving force. And again, it's about that. It's like, do you think you're capable of, being responsible if you find yourself in that situation? You need the time to grow into those things. And just like that, it's like you neglect your role to be like, that's beneath me, but that's the right role in that particular time. You need to understand that you won't be there for the rest of your life, Yeah.
Yeah, I think the maturing with age is something that the gaining of wisdom over time and basically seeing things and learning over time, I think we don't value enough. It's like a CEO that gets paid exorbitant amounts. Now, obviously, there's some issues with the actual amounts that some CEOs get earn and stuff, and there's lots of debates that can be had there. But just in terms of being like, okay, is it actually valuable to have a CEO that has a lot of experience, or is it better to just have the person that's straight out of college or something like that? And I think when you're straight out of college, you think, yeah, like I can obviously do what they're doing because like it's not that hard. You're just doing some random management stuff. In fact, it's probably easier than what I'm doing. And that's the kind of thoughts that you have. And in some sense, it's like, yeah, that's kind of true. But also in another sense, it's just completely missing the fact that time shows you things that you cannot learn in any other way than just by being in that, whatever it is, that industry, and just experiencing things and reacting to them and then seeing, oh, that worked out, or oh, that didn't work out, and learning in that way. And I think that sometimes just takes time and experience and to gain those abilities. And if you take on those kind of roles before you're ready, like they say here, you're not just doing a disservice to that role that you've taken. You're doing a double disservice because you're also sort of abandoning the things that you could have been good at doing and you could have contributed. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. However, at the very same time, I almost want to say that there's a point, and I guess it would take wisdom to decide where that point is, but there's a point at which this probably is the wrong approach as well, because sometimes you need to push someone into a role that they think that they're not ready for, and potentially they actually aren't even ready for that role. But it's only by taking that role on that they can learn and grow, and they can, within a reasonably short span of time, fit into that role. And it would have maybe taken them 5 years, where it actually could take them 5 months to get into that being actually truly ready for the role. And sometimes it's worth going through that rough, challenging part for the 5 months instead of being like, no, I'm not ready yet.
Well, so with that, so I hear what you're saying, but don't you think that's then, like you were saying, about it comes from someone wiser recognizing that you have the ability to do that, to step into it? I think it's a little different than you claiming without having the know-how and having that broader picture to be like, I want to be in that role, when essentially you're not ready for it, as opposed to someone has seen your potential and be like, actually, you're ready for it.
I think it's a good point and good distinction, because I do think that there's something right about what you said, where you most likely, it's more often that the wiser, more experienced person is going to be able to look at someone who's less experienced and say, yes, you actually are ready, even though you think you aren't. or this is the right time to step forward into this next step. And versus you making the decision yourself, you probably will make it incorrectly. I guess the thing that I'm sort of getting at is that someone might read this and they might say, oh, I'm not ready and therefore I'm never going to take that role. I'm not going to take that role. And then someone says to them, no, you should take it. It's going to be good. And I think it's a good point that you made to say, like, consider the person who is encouraging you to step into that role. Are they a peer who has pretty much the same sort of experience as you? Is it a family member who's like, oh, yeah, of course, you deserve it. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but they almost definitely are biased. Or is it your boss who you value their opinion of? Yeah, basically, in a very long-winded way, I agree with what you said. Okay, should we go to 42?
Yeah.
When someone treats you poorly or speaks ill of you, remember that they act this way because they believe that it is the right thing to do. If they are mistaken, they are the ones who suffer because they are deceived. Just as someone who misjudges a true statement is harmed by their own mistake, not the statement itself, the person who wrongs you is harmed by their own misguided views. Keep this in mind. You can respond with patience and understanding, thinking to yourself, this is how it seems to them. So, I can't remember if it's you or me.
It's you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is similar to something that we've chatted about before. Distinguishing, is it actually true or not? And if it is true, then it's true. But if it's mistaken, then it shouldn't be something that harms you. In fact, it's probably harmful to the person who thinks that because they're wrong about the way that they're approaching a situation or something like that. And for you to say, okay, this is in something that's in my control or it's not in my control, and almost taking a step back and saying, okay, this is something that's out their opinion and their mistake. Even I might try to correct it and that, but if I try and they just refuse and they hold strong to their incorrect opinion, then that's okay. That's, as he says, this is how it seems to them or seemed to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I've spoken a few times about this from the beginning already. But yeah, I do echo your sentiments on this as well. Yeah, it's like yes, there is that point of where you can look at it, and again, this more says speak ill, and the other one was like insult. It's along the same lines to be like, yes, you are in control of how you reacted, but at the same time, it's like the person that's wrong about the opinion of you is doing them some disservice because they might disregard you in a certain area which you might actually be helpful in, and as a result it won't harm you but rather them. So yeah.
Right, on to the next one. 48. An uninstructed person looks for benefit or harm from external things, while a philosopher expects all benefit and harm to come from within himself. Signs of progress in a philosopher include not criticizing or praising others, not blaming or accusing anyone, not boasting about oneself or one's knowledge. When faced with obstacles, he blames himself. If praised, he laughs it off internally. If criticized, he does not defend himself. He approaches everything with moderation and doesn't mind if others think he's foolish or ignorant. In essence, he monitors himself closely, as if watching an enemy lying in wait. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, I think here this is that section you had a few things to disagree about, that it's not wrong to sort of give praise, that has its own value. But yeah, I think for me with this, the one thing that stood out here was kind of the whole thing of, I know it's probably not as is, but how it appeared to me is like you sort of determine, like for instance, what your mental state is and how you respond to certain, how you take yourself out of certain situations. Like those are the obstacles. You can either, when you wake up, be like, it's another morning, I need to do this boring thing over, or be like, it's a new day, I'm ready to tackle what's ahead of me. And you don't need encouragement. Yes, as much as it's nice to hear people, cheer you or but the bigger part of going forward comes from within. You might get as many encouraging messages or as encouraging things said to you, but if you're not aligned with what's said, then it pretty much does nothing. You have to be in tune with that to actually go forth.
Yeah, I think similar to what you were saying, where, just to reread that beginning part, an uninstructed person looks for benefit or harm from external things, while a philosopher expects all benefit and harm to come from within himself. So it's that idea of, like you said, where you can be in the what people consider an absolute dream holiday location, and you can be miserable, or you can be in one of the worst places. You can be in I don't know, a place where you barely have shelter over your head, and you can be content and even joyful. And I think that's kind of what he's getting at. There's another book that we read a while ago where just a very paraphrased version is in my head, where it doesn't matter where you go, you will be taking yourself with you. So if you go to a wonderful destination, you will be there. If you go to a terrible destination, you will be there. And so it's your own character and self that you need to almost refine and try and, I think as the Stoics would put it, align with nature, meaning be rational, moral, just, those kinds of things. And that is what will make you content in situations, not the external circumstance, but the internal mental circumstance. Yeah. All right, the last one, 52. The most important and fundamental part of philosophy is applying its principles, such as the idea that we must not lie. The second part involves understanding why these principles are true, like proving we shouldn't lie, and the third part is about explaining and supporting these proofs, dealing with concepts like what constitutes a demonstration, a consequence, contradiction, truth, and falsehood. The third part is necessary for the second, and the second for the first, but the most essential part is the first. However, we often do the opposite. We spend most of our time on the third part, focusing all of our efforts there, and we neglect the first part entirely. As a result, we still lie, even though we have all the arguments ready to prove why we shouldn't. Yeah. I think it's a helpful way to wrap up, because we might understand all the principles and be able to prove all the principles are true, but if we don't actually live out those principles, what is the point? And sometimes, even if we can't fully convey why, but we like, okay, no, this principle is something that we feel is good. We don't have to know all the technical reasons. It's good to, and like, you want to base your decisions on something, but sometimes you know what the right thing to do is. You don't have to have some incredible intellectual argument for it. And on the other hand, if someone does have an incredible intellectual argument for it, but they don't actually live out that moral good, then who is actually the one that's living more in accord with nature?
Yeah, I mean, you put it very well, and I know it's deviating from what the context they put it in here, but as you're speaking, it just also reminded me, and it's something that frustrates me a lot. It's how people speak so much of what they would like to do, what they enjoy and whatnot, but never actually get to actually doing it. And I feel like it's the same thing here, and how it's put. It's like people focus so much on what the consequences of lying are, like what lies are and everything, but evidently live lives that are lies, instead of just going up, and because they have the tools, they have the principles, instead of arguing them or speaking out, just choosing that's how they're going to live their lives, Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. How did you find it?
Yeah, again, like I outed myself earlier, of like the skipping through. I think it's hit a lot more different. I mean, it's almost 2 years later that we did it 2 years ago, and I feel like, and I mean, I don't think we spoke about it when we did our last recording, but I know we might have chatted about it along the way, of it being something to revisit every single year. It's short enough for you to spend a couple of hours going through it every year and just see if you still agree, if you've grown in certain areas, and maybe perhaps agree with, because as much as it's there, not everything said here everyone agrees with. I mean, there were even parts you didn't agree with, and I'm sure over time understanding of them might also change. We might look at it, read it, and think about it differently. But yeah, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy going through it.
Yeah. Like you say, I think it's short enough that it's just worthwhile going through. I mean, if you aren't trying to take notes or do anything, you can read it in probably an hour or less. And it really is worthwhile. I mean, often the types of things that we go through in the books that we read are very similar, and they kind of remind us. But I think it's good to be reminded of these kinds of things. But I think this kind of a book is a little bit more distinct. A lot of the Stoic ideas, they're quite general ideas, but the way that they're written in a book like this is almost more punchy. And it helps you to just reflect and be like, oh, okay, actually, am I doing the things that I should be doing? Am I focusing on the things that I should be focusing on? Am I stressing about things that I just don't need to be stressing about? Am I spending money in ways that I just don't need to? because I'm trying to get external validation when the validation I should be settled in myself to some degree. Yeah, so I definitely agree that it's worthwhile, and I don't actually know how different I am reading it this time. I would think that I actually have a fairly similar view of reading it, but it's things that I've almost slipped past my mind over time, and like I've said a few times, helpful reminders. But yeah, I look forward to re-listening to episode number 16 and seeing what 2-year younger version of us thought about this book.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, James.
Until next time.
Cool.
Cheers.